Welcome everybody to our session, To Infinity and Beyond, Voter Rights, Institutionalization, and Revitalization. Full apologies in advance for this title. The Lightyear movie came out this summer. My nephew had a Toy Story themed birthday party. It's been on my mind, and also much like with what the disclaimer I gave at the beginning, we understand that regardless of all the things that we will talk about during this presentation, there's always more that we can do, and there's always more work that we can strive towards, more goals. And so this aspect of To Infinity and Beyond really struck a chord with me, and I got to name this session, so there you go. My name is Sara deVeer. I work at the Bard College Center for Civic Engagement. I am a Bard alum. I put my class year there, and I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Cicily Wilson.
Hi there, I'm Cicily Wilson. I've been at Bard for about 10 years. I just joined the Center for Civic Engagement, where I'm a colleague of Sara's in the last year. Nice to meet all of you.
Great. So we just wanted to go ahead and set the tone for who we even are, because we recognize that we're a pretty small institution. So maybe this is the first time that you're hearing of Bard College. Maybe you've heard of us, but you don't really have a concept of who we are and what this means. So we are a liberal arts institution that was first established in 1860. And we're in the New York State Hudson Valley. We're very rural. We have other more well-known neighbors within the same county as us, like Vassar and Marist, for example. We have about 2,000 undergrads that can fluctuate year to year. That's our current numbers on the slide. We have about a 9-to-1 classroom ratio. So a lot of our students know a lot of the administration by name. A lot of professors know their students by name. It's a very personalized setting. And Cicely, would you like to take over the second half of the slide?
Sure. So as Sara said, we have students coming from literally all over the world to this very rural place, even just across the river from us. If I can set the scene for you, it's the Hudson Valley. It's divided by the Hudson River. Right across the river where I live in Kingston, it is much more urban, but not quite, New York City. So even students coming from, some place like Kingston would think that, feel like a culture shock arriving to Bard's campus. So we have a lot of students coming from Bard early high schools, from international locations. We also represent folks who are incarcerated, and through the Bard Prison Initiative, folks who are pursuing the same type of degree that students would get here at Bard, but while they're incarcerated. And we also connect with over 40 institutions via the Open Society University Network, which on campus we call OSUN. You'll soon find out that Bard has a lot of acronyms, so it's a little bit of alphabet soup. We'll try not to do that, and we'll try and say all of the things and give them their names and explain them to you.
Great. So we first launched as an office as a Center for Civic Engagement about 10 years ago. We'll talk about this a little later, but Bard students have been fighting for equal access to voter rights long before the creation of the Center for Civic Engagement. This office was simply served to be a centralized place for that civic engagement to live, and for students to have resources to launch their civic engagement projects or get connected, both co-curricular and curricular. We've got some pictures at the bottom. These are not stock images. These are all pictures from within the last 6 months at campus. And you'll see in the middle one, that was a march for solidarity in Ukraine. So we're a very global campus in that way. And then also hyper local. You'll see the next picture over is a bunch of students doing an archaeology dig at a local parsonage. And so some ways that we've been able to institutionalize voting efforts is that we have been able to really insert ourselves into voter registration at check-in. So last Friday, for example, our incoming students checked in to campus for the first time. And out of about 400 students, we were able to register 116 students to vote on that day. So about a fourth of the first year class, we were registered to vote in a single day. And then we've been having softer touch points in the week since that. We also have curricular touch points. So that like the archaeology class I just spoke of, Cicely and I are often times popping into different classes and ensuring that those students are either registered to vote or know how to reach us should they want to change their voter registration. And similarly, those faculty members teaching that coursework know where to turn their students as well. This is a pretty important touch point because at a college, you know, a lot of things are optional, but going to class isn't really optional. Students still have to go to class and earn their credits and whatnot. So this is a pretty key touch point. And then especially since our office actually sponsors quite a few classes, that's our Engage Liberal Arts and Science coursework mentioned on the slide, where we're able to provide faculty stipends, we're able to provide a budget to our faculty to really have civic engagement at the core of their course. And then we also have a distinction on transcripts that students can get called the Certificate of Civic Engagement. So lots of different touch points in that way. And we try to make sure that voter registration and voter education is at the center of those different civic engagement touch points. Pathways, Cicely.
Yeah, I do want to add one thing to the
Sure.
last slide. It was a new initiative during the check-in. We're also surveying all of our students as they come in to understand where they stand in the process of whether they're eligible to vote because possibly they've not reached voter age, or they're an international student and not eligible to vote, or if they have decided they are registered to vote and have decided to stay registered in their home state. So we just want to see where all of our students stand as they enter into BARD and be able to record that, and then maybe see if that changes over time, and then know their status at any given point during their time here at BARD.
Definitely. It's like a census for us.
It's a census.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, so pathways. So as I was saying before, alphabet soup, here we are. CCE is a very large umbrella here at BARD. When I switched over from the Office of Residence Life and Housing over to civic engagement, people asked, well, what do they do over there? Well, they do a whole lot, and these are the many pathways, and they don't represent all of them that are here at BARD. We have the Trustee Leader Scholar Program, which is a program that encourages student-led initiatives. Students can walk into that office with an idea and craft a student-led initiative that they can lead and then recruit volunteers from the student body to do civic engagement projects, and that can be locally or internationally. The CDO, the Career Development Office, again, has a hand in providing internships or initiating internships. They also are very active in the Engage Liberal Arts and Science classes. We call them ELAS classes, BARD Abroad. Again, student mobility around the world. Election at BARD, which is our student-led initiative, student voter registration group, and I think one of our reps are here today. And a couple of our TLS projects have become institutional works. BPI was a TLS project, the BARD Prison Initiative, which I spoke of before. Brothers at BARD, which is also a TLS project. Sister to Sister, La Voz, which is a Spanish newspaper or magazine that is in the Hudson Valley. It's the largest circulation in the Hudson Valley. Also, started as a student-led initiative. And of course, OSIN, which I spoke about before, the Open Society University Network.
Definitely. So again, as we mentioned before, with all of these different offices that we're connected to through this theme of civic engagement, how do we really centralize voter registration and voter education at its core, right? And so, for example, the Career Development Office, how can we connect students to local officials to be getting them internships, or vice versa with the Engaged Liberal Arts and Science classes? If we have students who are interested in interning with local officials, but they technically can't call it an internship because of their legal status, how can we get them credit? How do we leverage our ability as an educational institution to ensure that every single one of our students has some sort of touch point with voter advocacy, even if they are not even if they are not eligible to vote, right? And so this can look like a bunch of different things, and then especially with specific pathways like Brothers at Bar, like Lavos, where these groups have a very specific relationship with voting and with elected officials. How can we make sure to meet those groups where they're at, especially with having different Spanish translations and different, accessibility to decoding the voter registration system. So really thinking through what are barriers to our population and how do we break down those barriers, and also how do we leverage our private college resources for the public good. That is at the core of what we do here. So transitioning gears, we'd like to walk you through what the timeline looks like. And this is all on our website. We just pull some stuff out. So again, even before our office launched, we have a record of BARD students in the 90s partnering with our Dutchess County neighbors, Vassar College, to campaign against voter suppression from our Board of Election, right? And so this is the first record of a very tumultuous history with our Dutchess County Board of Elections. This includes students being mandated to fill out affidavit ballots because of how our Board of Elections saw campus address as inferior to a home address. We also launched a class action lawsuit in 2012. We've launched a lot of lawsuits since then. Most recently in 2020, we launched a lawsuit against our Board of Elections maintaining the then only polling place for our district, which was not only dangerous in terms of COVID, but also had a lot of ADA restrictions to that polling place. So just to give you an idea, this polling place is not safe to walk to from campus. A lot of students don't have access to their own transportation. So we, as Election at Bard, Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassadors, were driving students down a winding road that didn't have sufficient lighting because, again, we're rural, so not sufficient lighting, going to this tiny little polling place where oftentimes students, if it was raining on election day, were waiting outside in the rain because you can't even fit all the voters into a waiting area because there was no waiting area. Our Board of Elections didn't provide any kind of refuge from the rain. So we, as BARD, were bringing pop-up tents to our polling place to keep our students and any other voter in our district out of the rain. There is also stairs involved on one side, the entrance to the polling place on one side of the building, and on the other side of the building, there was a ramp, but a ramp that's not ADA compliant, that was specifically built actually for coffins, because this was in a church. And so it was more so to get coffins in and out of the sanctuary, but not really the ideal location for a polling place. We host the majority of voters in our district right here on campus. So listing all of these reasons in a lawsuit why do we still have a polling place off campus? And so in 2020, we were able to successfully win this lawsuit and get our first annual polling place on campus. The following year, the Board of Elections said, oh no, that was just a COVID special case. Your lawsuit and the judge ruling last year doesn't count for this year. And so then we had to sue again. So it's been a really fun journey with our Board of Elections, but that brings you up to speed to this year. And then also with our with these kinds of presentations, we also wanted to talk about, not only our victories, but also our challenges. So unfortunately, in 2016, get in the mindset of where you were on election day 2016. You remember? You're thinking about it. So imagine if you are on a college campus, as civically engaged as our own college campus, as we've described. You've got a lot of students registering to vote. A lot of energy is building up. A lot of students are interning with different campaigns around locally. You go up to our election at bar table on campus to get connected to the transportation, because again, at that time we had to transport students off campus, and you find out you're not registered to vote, right? That was a crushing barrier for a lot of students, and a crushing barrier for us as an election at bar team, that we had a lot of students who, unfortunately, the team at the time misplaced a lot of voter registration forms. And so we had a lot of students, instead of going to the local poll, which is 5 minutes down the road, 10 minutes down the road, had to drive 40 minutes down the road to Poughkeepsie, which is an hour-and-a-half round trip to vote affidavit in front of a judge, right? And so there was a lot of mistrust sown into our student population in 2016 that we had to rebuild, and we had to build back better systems. And that we did. And special shout out to Ava Mazie, who led the team at the time and won a Hidden Heroes Award from this Andrew Goodman Foundation a couple years after that for rebuilding the reputation of election at Bard and taking it over after that student team all graduated and moved on, and they're doing really great things, but then rebuilding that reputation. And really and truly, she was a hidden hero that got to be recognized. So thank you, Andrew Goodman, for recognizing that sometimes you can have a comeback and swallow your challenge and come back better. So anyways, and then 2020, we had a lot of students purged from our voter rolls because of COVID. 2020 was also the census. I'll let Cicily take over from that story.
Yes, as I mentioned, I came from Residence Life and Housing, where I was the director during COVID. And as you may remember, the census was really, it was not operating as it you normally would, and had a lot of setbacks and challenges because of COVID. And so they changed gears quite a bit during that time, initially asking folks to do things online. That system never worked. And so when they were hurrying up and closing it at the end of the year, actually not quite, in August, they decided to send out folks to collect the information. And instead of actually collecting the information that they would usually collect in a usual census, which is collecting the information about who would live here most of the time, they actually asked for who was here on April 1st. And so April 1st, 2020, most students in colleges had returned home. SPARD never closed or asked folks to leave, but people did ultimately do that. And instead of asking what amount of students who would be here at the time, it would be about 1,300 to 1,400 students. They asked for the total on April 1st, which is 300, which obviously impacted the representation that we would get for the next 10 years. And that BARD is not alone in that. That happened to so many colleges and spaces and places, much like Red Hook, New York, where some colleges only reported 32 students. So we're dealing with the impact we're going to be dealing with the impact for quite some time. When we met with the officials to talk about amending that total. They didn't have a system for that, because the system of the census has been in place for decades and decades, 100 years. So there was a process, and they didn't actually follow their own processes. And so they had to develop one, and they released it this June. We refiled our numbers, and we're able to amend those numbers. I don't know what the result will be or how that will impact.
To be determined.
To be determined. But in any case, it was definitely a challenge, and might continue to be for the next decade.
Definitely. And we just wanted to, again, bring this up as a part of our presentation, because we want, if anyone else who's watching this presentation is also at a college campus, that this was strategically done and your campus was strategically targeted with bad information, false information from your local Census Bureau. We just want to say, you're not alone. That happened to us. And we understand the pain that puts your campus through and your local community through. So
I think there was a raised hand, but.
Yeah, Yael, would you like to ask a mid-presentation question?
I mean, I'm happy to save it till later. I just, I remember the census piece happening, and it was in the midst of the primary, so there were so many things taking place at the time, and I would just be curious if other people experienced it, and I would welcome an opportunity at another time to figure out what discrepancy resulted in terms of the redistricting, which happened, and the resulting outcome. I didn't realize that in June they issued a redo. So I welcome that conversation in a separate space too.
Great, yeah. So I believe a lot of people on this call might already be familiar with Yael, who just was speaking, but we do credit our polling place lawsuit victories to Yael Brungberg, who's on the call, Mike D'Onofrio, and Doug Mishkin, who have been our fearless legal team as we continue to challenge our Board of Elections. So thank you, Yael. Other honorable mentions is that we, as a part of our polling place lawsuit series, as you know, we're now considering it. We also were a part of campaigning for legislation in New York State that would mandate college campuses that have over a certain threshold of on-campus voters to automatically get a polling place, because not everyone and not every campus, we recognize, has a champion like Yael, who has the resources, the capacity, and the energy to help fight injustices. And so we're very happy for that legislation to have passed, and we're going to have resources in our last slide if you'd like to read more about that. And then we also had a meet and greet with Hillary Clinton in the spring, where one of our students, as part of Election at Bard, that's the third picture at the bottom, got to have a conversation with Hillary Clinton about Election at Bard and Andrew Goodman Foundation and the work that we've been able to do here at Bard, which was really exciting. So what's next, Cicely?
What's next? So I spoke a little bit about expanding the tracking system of voters and non-voters, just understanding where students stand in their civic engagement journey, which includes, the right to vote. So we will continue to do that, and conflating our systems in terms of having a registration number and our student numbers that we have internally here at Bard, so we always know who we're talking about, because sometimes students use different names to register to vote than what they would put on their student ID. They might use another name here at our institution. and in other spaces use a different name. So we want to be able to make sure that we're talking about the same person and knowing how that person is tracking throughout their time here at Bard, whether their registration was purged, or maybe if they go study abroad or take a semester off and they don't vote during that time, that we want to make sure that their registration wasn't purged, that they continue to be registered to vote. So expanding that tracking system and understanding what it is that our local board of elections is pinpointing to purge a person, you know, and seeing if there is a trend, if there is something that we can point to and say, it looks like they're doing this to this type of person. And so we can understand what's happening a little bit more, but that means that we have to track it better.
Yes, absolutely. And that has been a part of what Cicily, since coming over to our office from Residence Life, is in a very key position to do, because of that intersection of a Residence Life and civic engagement, and being able to bring these two elements of student life together, which is amazing.
Little known fact, I also worked for the census at one point, so.
Yes, yeah, so she's a triple threat, people. Yeah, and so also take a look at something that's been helpful for us, and we recommend to you, is to actually look at your county budget, specifically the budget for the Board of Elections. So that is something that we did at our office, and then spoke during a public hearing on the county budget. That's that first image. That's our boss, Erin Canan. She's speaking at a public hearing specifically about how the Board of Elections has this element of their budget on educational partnership that's virtually non-existent, right? And so calling out your commissioners to say, you know, what are you even doing with this budget? Because I'm asking you to be one of your educational partners, and you're actively fighting me against this. So let's talk about that. Also documenting. So something in the terms of our in the course of our lawsuits, is that anytime we send a formalized letter, especially a letter of complaint to our Board of Elections, we post it on our website. And so we can be very transparent about those kind of communications. Similarly, a lot of times, at least with our Board of Elections, again, if this is helpful, this is just what's been helpful for us, is that if they are having a public hearing, especially a public hearing to decide a polling place, and you think it's being recorded, because it is being recorded, they might not post that recording. It might never be posted publicly. And so something that we've been doing that's really helpful for us, and we've been able to catch our Board of Elections in making statements that then there's no backup documentation for, is that then we record it ourselves and we post it on our website and have a backup recording, so that we're not reliant on the Board of Elections to post what should be posted, essentially. So something like this, for example, you see the red light flashing, you know you're being recorded, but are you yourself keeping a backup copy of this, so that should it not be posted? Not to call out AGF, I know y'all are really great with that, but thinking in terms of your Board of Elections, how are you creating backup documentation for your own records, for your own upcoming voter rights fights? Another thing that's coming up is that we're going to be hosting a series of midterm debates for the first time since 2018. I posted that picture in the middle, is from our last one. We had a very contentious primary in 2018, which, as you can see, lots of folks were vying for the votes. And we're co-hosting it for the first time with a local newspaper. So our community, like a lot of communities in 2008, lost a local newspaper. And we just had a community member start a new paper about a year ago, and one wanted to partner with us. And so we said, sure. So that is coming up this October. And then also making sure to, similarly, that third picture is of me actually on election day, directing traffic towards our polling site because in 2021, because in 2020, the Board of Elections said that by having a security guard directing people, it was considered an aggressive presence that actually made non-barred voters feel intimidated from voting at our polling site. And so instead you got me directing traffic, who I think a lot of people would say I'm non-intimidating. So also, in addition to what Cicely said before about asking and having honest conversations with your Board of Elections about why people are getting purged, also thinking through like why, thinking through the reasons of why you might not have a polling place or why you might, X, Y, and Z, and then thinking about how you can counteract that reason. So our Board of Elections said we had an aggressive presence directing traffic. So we put a non-aggressive presence directing traffic, but we still got traffic directed to our polling place. So thinking through that. And then also thinking through how, the benefit of being on a college campus is that we constantly have new students all the time. So how can we utilize the new leaders and the new focus to revitalize this sense of hope? I know earlier in the summit, during one of the breakout rooms, one of the questions that was asked of the panelists is, how do you keep hope alive when a lot of people have lost hope in our election system? And I think for a lot of us at BARD, it's maintaining the focus on student ideas and student energy and fanning the flame with as a community that then can also be channeled into something like voter rights. Because once students start to feel like campus is home and they want to fight for that home, they will show up at the polling place more and more because they have made a home for themselves here and they want to vote here. And so while we are nonpartisan, we don't push our students to vote in a certain way with a certain party or vote in a certain place, we also want to make sure that as much as they want this to feel like home, it can, and they will fight for their campus essentially. And just making sure that we as a staff have presence within our campus and have presence as a supportive office for our student population. Cicely, did you have anything more you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think we had some talks with students who have been here for some time and talks with new students. Luckily, we have a bunch of new students on campus first years, and there is a little bit of a difference because student engagement looked different for the last couple of years. Some folks haven't had the opportunity to be in person or been able to be engaged in the way that we have been before. But I think now with COVID waning, hopefully still, and is on the downward spiral, that there are going to be more opportunities and more hope to be engaged in person, which really is reignites people's passion. I think that in a very different way than how we've been interacting for the past couple of years or how we've had to interact. So there is a lot of hope on the horizon.
Great. And then as previewed, we do want to hear from you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, all these pictures are pictures from our archives. So the Ava Mazie is the picture, the first picture holding up the yellow vote sign. Our middle picture is our election day 2020, when we had our first polling place on campus. And this was the line of community members at 6 a.m. when our on-campus polling place opened, and they were that eager to vote. And that eager to utilize this on-campus polling place for the first time ever. And then our last picture is our team during COVID. They all bought matching Election at BARD masks to wear on election day. And it was just a really great atmosphere on campus. Again, very, very hopeful, even within a crisis of hope, a COVID crisis. All these crises combined, our students still have fire within them. And so we as educators, as administrators, are trying to stoke those flames and making sure our students know exactly how to set the world on fire within the polling place, and then after elections as well, to make sure to keep their elected officials accountable and build a better tomorrow. So great. So that's our presentation. But again, we want to hear from you, like what resonated with you, what has worked on your campus, all that good stuff. And I'll stop sharing, but I did want to leave you with this. These are the QR codes and whatnot that will be circulated afterwards. So awesome.